Hello everybody, let's talk about how to get our car animations out of Maya and into Unreal. So what we have here is I've got one shot that I've been animating. This is the perspective view, then I've had the shot view over here on the right. And what I want to do now is start working on getting this into, or the camera shot right here on the right. What I want to work on is getting this into Unreal so that I can actually start getting everything visually set up correctly and check my environment and check if I need to start changing anything in the animation, or rather just seeing what this would look like lit, textured, and rendered. So let's see what that process takes. The first thing that I want to do is I want to go to my car rig, and I could do this from my scene that I'm working in, but I'm going to do it from the actual car rig. So I went to File, Open, and open the sedan. You're going to have to do this for each of the animations that you have, or for each of the car. I'm sorry, for each car that you're using, you're going to have to do this for. If you have two sedans, two of the same car, you're only going to have to do this once. But if you have like the sedan and the SUV, like I have here, you'll have to do this once for both. Okay. All right. So what I want to do is export out what's called a skeletal mesh from Maya using the game export menu options. A skeletal mesh can be defined as a model with a skin binding according and following a joint system. So the joints drive the model. So if I turn the joints on here, you can see these rigs have this very simple joint structure. And if you select the controls, you can see which joints that these controls are actually manipulating. For export into a game engine, we essentially need to bake all this animation down onto these joints, and that's going to be easy for Unreal or any other game engine, to be honest, to easily read. I'm going to turn the display of the joints back off because we do not need those turned on. Whoops, there we go. And the things that we need to select are going to be the mesh. We can find that in the outliner over here on the left side in the outliner. If your outliner is hidden, just click the icon there. Inside of the sedan mesh group lists all of the mesh that we need, all the models. Inside of the sedan rig, we have what's called the deformation system. Don't be fooled by the fit skeleton, motion system, etc. This is very particularly, we need these joints, and these are the joints that I had toggled the display on a second ago. So we need to make sure to have all of those selected. Do not do what I just did and hold shift. You'll get everything in between. Instead, what I want to do is select the first object under the mesh, hold shift, select the last object under the mesh. It'll get all of those. So I shift click that. Now what I want to do is hold control, select the first root, and then holding shift, I can now select the last root, and it'll get everything in between there. And that way I've kind of segmented out and I've not accidentally selected any of these extra groups or controls, anything else in between. I can now start exporting out this animation. Before I go too much further, I want to talk about creating custom selection sets. With this set, rather than clicking this over and over and over again, doing what I just did there, I can come up to Create, Sets, Quick Selection Set. And I can give this a name. Sedan UE export, and I can either say OK or add to shelf. I'm going to say add to shelf, and notice that I navigated to the custom shelf. So it's going to add a button up here. It's going to call it what I named it, Sedan UE. We can only see the U here if you can't read it that far. Additionally, what it also created is this Sedan UE export set down here at the bottom in our outliner. I can right click and say select set members to easily select what set I had just made. Additionally, if I made the button, I can click the button. Now, if you were to try to click this button in the animation scene, it's not going to work because of namespace issues. So instead, just make sure that you're either setting this button up or this quick select setup either on the rig or within your animation scene, one of the two. With this selected, I'm going to go to File, Game Exporter, and this is how we actually get it out of Maya and into Unreal. We need to do multiple exports here, and right now, for me, it is very simple. I only need to do two. The first one is going to be, like I mentioned earlier, a skeletal mesh, which is this model, plus all of the joints that I currently have selected. And I really want to point out with this game exporter that if I, whoa, it's following my cursor precisely. If I was to and I'll try not to move my cursor a ton. That way it's not disorienting. But if I was to say export now, take a look at that. It says export all. And instead, what I want to do is change that from export all to export selection. Additionally, instead of selection, what I could do is say export object set, because I just made an object set called sedan UE export. Either option works as long as you have your selection highlighted and as long as you have your object set set. All right, that was very disorienting. I'm going to quickly pause the video and adjust my magnifying tool settings. So again, just to recap, export your object set or the selection. I'm going to go with selection for now, but I could just do the object set. Everything else, I'm going to leave as defaults. Let's just double check the settings. They're good. So what I want to do is down here at the bottom of this window, we have what's called path. I'll zoom back in. There we go. That's how I expect the magnifying tool to work. Kind of, not exactly. What I want to do is pick a folder directly, where to go, and I can say scenes, and you can see here I have made a game export folder within the scenes, and I can start exporting here very particularly all of the information that I need. I could create more subfolders if I wanted to say really clean, and in fact let's do that. I will call this subfolder skeletal mesh. I'll put meshes, and I'll make another one, animations. So this is a skeletal mesh. This is the sedan skeletal mesh. Now I could call it sedan skeletal mesh, but I'm just going to call it sedan. And then I could add more information if I want to UE, or I could just say sedan UE. Whatever you want to call it, I'm simply going to call mine sedan today. And I have made a mistake. This is just to choose the directory, and instead I need to enter the file name here, right below the path on this game exporter window. Just to double check all my settings, we're in the model tab, exporting selection to this path. Click export, and it will be successful. Now, to the next part. I need to export out my animation. In order to do that, I'm going to go to my animation scene now, and I can start the same process. This time, though, we don't need all of that export information. We only need the skeletal system. So what I want to do is find my sedan and go in my outliner. This is why I did the export for the model and skeleton in the rig rather than in this scene, because there's a lot of information in this scene. But I want to find the sedan rig and find the deformation system, and there are all those joints, and I just need to have these selected. We don't have to click bake or anything. We don't have to do any of that information. This exporter file, game exporter, is going to do all of that information for us. Let's zoom in. We're no longer exporting the model, we're exporting animation clips. And I do not want to export all. This will take forever, so make sure that you absolutely are saying export selection, or you are making an object set to easily export out. Do note that it does come with a lot of default sets, so I always like to just export selection and have selected what I would like. Next, under animation clips, we need to define the clips that we're exporting. In game exporting, typically you animate multiple clips all in one scene. For us, all of our shots are saved into different Maya scenes. This is shot 2 for me. So I'm going to say clip name, hit plus, and now I can name this clip sedan underscore shot 2. I never like to actually use numbers in the names, so I'm going to rename that TWO. We can open our settings to just double check everything here. I don't need to change anything there, so we're good. Do note that it says save to multiple clip files. We can export multiple clips, but this is our entire shot sequence, so I don't need to. Before we go down to path, let's think about the start and end. time here. By default, it should go to what your playback range is. I'll zoom out so we can see. Just ensure that that is correct. For me, this starts at frame 27 and ends at frame 80. I will now go back to choose the path where this is going to go. I have a game export folder and I have animations. So I will say choose this folder and give this a name. Sedan_shot 2. I like to keep these two names the same for this particular project. I'm going to say export. Before I do, I just want to make sure and double check that export selection is checked. Sometimes that can mess us up if it says export all. If this takes a while, typically that's the issue. That being said, we're good. I can now zoom out and I'm done in Maya. So let's minimize that and let's get into Unreal. Once you open this scene and have your project set up, you'll be able to navigate around. If you were not there that day, we talked about navigating around in Unreal. Highly recommend looking up some tutorials online and checking out how to do such. But it's very much like a video game. Just as a quick recap, if you hold your right click button, you can use WASD to move around. You can use Q and E to go up and down. And additionally, while we're holding right click, I can scroll my mouse wheel up to increase my speed, or I can scroll it down to slow down my scene. Oh my gosh, this park has so many benches. Moving on. If you click the content drawer at the bottom of the screen, this is how we're going to be importing our information. Think of this as your Maya project, but this is the Unreal project. I have created two folders that you probably do not have. You can create these or name them however you would like. To create these, we can either, in the top left of the content drawer, say Add, New Folder, or simply right click and say New Folder. One folder is called Car Animations. The other folder here is called Car Meshes. I first need to import my car mesh before I import my animations. So let's hop inside there. Right now, all I need is to import the mesh, and you can read right here. It says drop files here or right click to create content. If we were to right click, this is how we build games. This is how we build materials. This is how we build blueprints, etc. We're not worried about that. We're importing a skeletal mesh. I'm going to open a folder structure and navigate to this project that I'm working in. Very specifically, the Maya project folder that we've worked in. If I go to my scenes folder and go to my game export folder, these are two that I did in class. But today, for this demo, what I have are these animation skeletal meshes. Again, I'm importing the car mesh, so I'm going to bring in my sedan. I'm going to click and drag that to this folder. It's going to pull open these FBX import options. Luckily for us, the defaults are fine. Say import. Couple things happen. Notice, oh, it is auto-saving. Notice that my content browser is now pulled up and away. This is just pulling up a new window, just like in Windows, if you were to open a new file explorer, to show you where everything is located in. Secondly, notice that we got a message log. We have a ton of errors. We don't have to worry about this, thankfully. We can just close that out and carry on with life. Our sedan skeletal mesh is here. Also notice that we have a material, 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 and material. Additionally, we have a physics asset and a skeleton. Thankfully, all we need is this skeletal mesh. You're welcome to double click it to view in this kind of content browser window what this looks like. And you can currently see all of these meshes no longer have their textures attached to them. We'll talk about updating these textures correctly as we move forward. For now, I'm going to close that out, and I need to add my sedan to the scene. I can simply left click and drag the sedan onto the scene in an interactive manner. Note that I drug out the skeletal mesh and not the skeleton or physics asset. These are two different purposes. We need the skeletal mesh. Don't need to double click it like I did there. That was an accident. I can hit F on the keyboard just like I can in Maya to focus my camera onto the sedan and rotate around it. I'm going to bring my content browser back over here. And before I move too much further, please note that this pop-up that it made is just a duplicate of this content browser at the bottom of the window. What I like to do is in older versions of Unreal, it was docked at the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to click and drag this content browser and dock it in the lower portion of the screen here. I can now navigate my content folder for this project willy-nilly. Please note that in the upper right corner, we have the outliner that lists all of our objects in the scene. So if you wanted to adjust the lighting, such as the atmospheric fog settings, and hide those, you're welcome to. But what I want right now is to find my sedan. I don't want to rename it, I just want to select it. Additionally, below the outliner, we have what's called our details menu. This shows us the location values, just like it would in Maya for the channel box. I'm going to zero out those locations, and it's going to take my sedan to the world origin. It's no longer here, and we have plenty of seating options. I want to find the sedan. I'm going to select the sedan in the detail, or the outliner, sorry, and hit F. And it's going to take me to my sedan. This is the world origin. This icon, by the way, is just the skylight. We don't need to worry about it. I like to just reset my sedan to the world origin because I'm going to import animation onto it. Speaking of, we can now go in and bring our car animation import in. So I went down to my content browser and double click my car animations folder. I'm going to go back to my Maya folder structure and say game export folder, animations, sedan shot 2, sedan shot 2. Kind of awkward that I renamed it twice. Let me talk about why. In the game export settings, I had named this shot shot 2. In the path, I had also named this sedan underscore shot 2. So to make this a little bit of an easier file name, you can see the preview of what it would be called down here. Instead, what I'm going to say is sedan underneath path, and then clip name, this will be called underscore shot 2. And now we have an easier file name format. I could re-export, and in fact, might as well. I still have my skeletals, my joints, skeletals. I have my joint selected, so I can say export. Export successful. And now I'm going to hop back into Unreal and go to my project folder and get rid of the old export I did earlier. And now I have my sedan shot 2 that I can click and drag to bring in. We do need to change some options on this FBX import. Skeleton is set to none. We need to make sure that this is going to be set to our sedan skeleton. If this is set to the SK underscore vehicle skeleton, our animation will not come in properly. In addition, it won't come in properly if it's anything else. So just make sure when you import your animations that you're importing them to the correct skeleton. Hovering over this, I can double check to make sure that this is what I've imported rather than what is already in Unreal with this hot key menu that's popped up, this tooltip. You can see its path is game. Let me scrub so make sure it's on screen. Oh, now it's at the bottom. Alright, well that's awkward. Come on now. There we go. So you can see there, the path is set to game car meshes. And you can see the preview skeletal mesh name as well. So just make sure that that is set to the correct skeleton. Everything else is fine. And say import. Looking at our car though, it looks to be very stationary. That's because we need what's called a level sequence in order to play any animation. To create a level sequence, I'm going to go up here to the top. There is a drop down icon right next to the play icon. You may be instinctively ready to click that, but this is more so for playing a video game rather than playing an animation. Instead, we need to go to this clipboard icon, this clapboard, and say add level sequence. It's asking you where to save this to. I'm just going to use my default content folder, but feel free to make a subfolder for this. I'm going to call this car chase. Save. Currently, I no longer need my content browser docked. I can close that window. I can always open it again at the bottom if I ever need it. Our sequencer is here. We can now hit play down here, but my car is still not going. The reason is there is no information within the sequencer. The way this works is somewhere between Maya and video editing software. We have to give a list of skeletal meshes or static meshes that we plan to animate, and then add animation to it. In this instance, what I need to do is go to my outliner, select the sedan, click and drag to add this to my sequencer. The sedan is now added, and I can say animation plus, and there's my animation. Because with this sedan, even though it's in my sequencer, if I do not add that animation, and I scrub through, no animation will play. So I need to click plus. This will now list all of the applicable animations that I have imported into this Unreal project. This is very important. From that previous step, when I imported the animation and we chose the right skeleton, this is why that's important. Because now I get to see, hey, this is sedan for shot 2 when I go to add animation to my sedan. My car's disappeared. If you're having trouble finding where your sedan went, we can select it in the outliner and hit F, which will focus our camera to our floating sedan. And now if I hit play in my sequencer, my animation is playing. Something I would like to point out is my animation does seem a little bit higher off the ground. I'm not exactly sure why. Ah, that's more like it. I also would like to point out that this animation is not meant to be viewed from outside of the sedan. If you recall, this is what my shot is. So the animation from the outside looks a little weird, and that's okay, because this will all be viewed when I import my camera from inside of the sedan. Now, I just need to export out all of my shots of animation, and I can add even more to this particular sequence. So now I currently have 2 shot 2s. And I can stack them right next to each other so that they play back to back. I always forget the keyboard shortcut to play in Unreal. I think it's like Shift Spacebar. It is. You hit Shift Spacebar to play back your sequence. Or pause. The way this sequencer works is you will not have to make multiple versions of this, but instead you'll have one where you're editing and importing all of your shots. Additionally, you'll have a list of all of your cars with all of their separate animations. To that point, I would now like to add in the SUV. I'm going to open the rig. I'm going to export the model. Make sure it's set to the right folder structures. I'm going to go to the animation file, and instead of selecting the sedans rig and skeletal structure, I'm going to select the SUVs. If you're having a hard time finding where it is, feel free to select one of the controls and hit F in your outliner. It'll take you right to it, or it'll also just highlight what you have selected. Remember, we need this deformation system. My animation clip is already open from previous, but I want to make sure to rename this from sedan to SUV. I'm going to add an extra naming convention here so that I understand, because I have two sedans in all of my shots, that this is, or I have two SUVs in all of my shots. So I need to make sure that this is SUV underscore A. So if we take a look, this is animation for SUV A during shot 2. Use whatever naming convention makes sense to you. I have the export selection turned on. I will say export. I will now hop back into Unreal, go to my content browser, and in my car meshes, I will import that car mesh. This will get very busy if I was to import it into the same folder. So I'm going to make another subfolder and call this SUV. Ideally, I would have had a subfolder for both the sedan and SUV, but this works for now. SUV, click and drag. Defaults are fine for bringing in the skeletal mesh. Tons of errors. Content browser opens. Let's just clear that. I can double click the SUV skeletal mesh just to investigate. Again, we'll come back and talk about the materials in a bit. I can close this content browser out as well. I now need to add all of that to my scene. So SUV skeletal mesh, interactive click and drag, SUV from the outliner to my sequencer. So now we have a list of sedan and SUV. I can minimize all my sedan material and just focus on the SUV. Now I need to bring in the animation. Need to import that. Going back to my animations folder of my export. Nope, I'm dragging the sedan. Need to make sure I'm dragging the correct animation, SUV. And again, we need to make sure that our skeleton is set to the appropriate our skeleton. So right here, I do not want to select my SUV or my sedan. I want to scroll and find my SUV. Alternatively, I could just type it out to find it easily. The animation is now imported. I can go back to my sequencer. Click the plus icon. I want to make sure I'm doing this on the animation layer underneath the SUV. There's my SUV A shot 2. Add that. Scrub through. Oh no, my SUV is missing. This is likely due to my SUV and its transform values not being reset before I imported the animation. Let's get rid of the animation. To do that, I just selected SUV A shot 2 in the sequencer and hit delete. Before I go too much further, because I did an interactive click and drag to add the SUV to the scene, here's my location of that SUV. I need to reset this all to 0. My SUV will disappear for the time being, but that's okay, because now I can say animation plus shot 2 for my SUV, and there we go. I'm going to open my sedan so I can compare these two, and I need to make sure that they're timed in the same manner for each other. So now when I hit shift play, or shift spacebar I should say, it's going to play those two sequences of both of these cars. The only things left now to do are bring in our cameras and reconnect materials. Let's talk about adding textures back to these cars. You can see for my sedan, I already got the tires going. I'm going to go back to the content drawer and double click the skeletal mesh. I can easily access and change the materials down here in the lower right. The tires is the first thing listed, and if you're not sure how it's listed, by default they're going to have a selection imported to them from Maya. And right here it's very easy to see that this is the MI Sedan Interior 01, and Maya added this extra A1, or I should say Unreal rather, because that name already existed. All I need to do is in this drop down menu select the corresponding material that already exists within this project. Please note that this said interior, so that's all the texture on the inside. Next, going down, same thing for the body. Let's pull the camera out. Should be pretty easy. Should be listed right above or below, more than likely above, each one of these. Nice. Glass is next. There we go. This one looks a little odd. I don't know if that is proper or if that's meant to be like a type of odd tint. Let's make sure I have that selected proper. Sedan glass, sedan glass. Here's another sedan glass. Let's try it. Much nicer. It did tint our headlights though. We could definitely continue playing around with this and figuring out other types. Or we could go back to Maya and also re-export the skeletal mesh with different materials as well. Notice in this menu that we've pulled up in this asset browser that the word sedan is up here in this tab with an asterisk next to its name. That means this asset is not saved. File, save. Now that asset is. In my overall scene, it should now be updated. Let's do the same thing for the SUV. Content drawer. Navigate to my SUV. Double click the skeletal mesh. Pieces is the first one. Not sure what that means. Guess it means the fender and bumpers and side paneling. Interior is going to be pretty straightforward. Let's update it. And again, I'm just looking for the same name of this material because this project already has these materials. SUV body. Sedan glass. Let's change that to the SUV glass, shall we? May have to find it here. But considering it's just a shaded window material, I was thinking maybe we could get away using the sedan. The answer is no. We cannot. Let's see if we can find the SUV version. It's a long list of materials here. Let's search. SUV. Pieces, interior, glass. Much nicer. Make sure to save this. I can simply hit Control S We'll go to File, Save in this asset browser. Closing out of that and taking a look at our scene. We now have this chaos. Just as a reminder, the sedan shot 2 is repeating because I have it listed here twice. We could go in and customize these materials, by the way, but we'll save that for another lecture. Let's export our camera animations. If you have not grouped your camera like I have here, you'll have an easier time than I will. Unreal doesn't understand Maya's grouping system, nor does it understand the constraints, so we have to tell the export system, hey, ignore these aspects, or we have to go around and do the alternative methods. So if you have not used a grouping system for your camera, all you have to do is select your camera, and you can skip ahead. But I have to set my project up a little bit differently, and I'm going to show you how to go about doing that. First off, I've created a locator, but I'm going to delete it so I can create it again to show you that step. I'm going to go to Create Locator, and what I'm going to do with this locator is match it to my camera. With the locator selected, I'm going to Shift select my camera and say Modify Match Transformations Match All. So now, on the frame I did that with, my camera is my locator is oriented precisely like my camera. And again, this was a point of view camera, so it's right there in the car seat. But if I scrub through, it just stays wherever I did the match transformations. Instead, what I want is for this locator to copy over the animations from the camera. To do this, I need to say, camera, please constrain this locator. So I'm going to first select the camera, then Shift select the locator. Constrain parent. Always like to just check my options. Maintain offset, translate rotates. So now as I scrub through, that locator perfectly follows the camera. What I need to do now is get this animation baked onto this locator and get rid of the constraint. Because again, Unreal does not understand this constraint. So with this locator selected, I'm going to say key. This is under my animation menu set, by the way. Key, bake simulation option box. I'm going to reset these settings. I'm going to leave everything at their defaults and say apply. Just make sure that it says selected. What this does is it gets rid of the parent constraint and keyframes all of those values on every frame. The parent constraint's still there, but we no longer need it, so we can hit delete. Now, we're essentially going to do the same thing for our camera. I'm going to select my camera, and I'm going to delete all the keyframes. So when I hit play, my camera is still following that group, which is constrained to the car, but you can see in my shot camera here, we no longer have that secondary animation or anything happen. We're just locked to the car. Secondly, I want to ungroup this from that group. I'm going to select the camera and hit Shift P. So now whenever I play through my scene, sometimes, by the way, Maya freaks out when we do stuff like this. This camera is no longer updating. Just change it from one camera back to, that was my shot 2 camera. So now when I play, this camera is stationary and is no longer moving. So what I want to do is match these two back together. So I'm going to say, hey, locator, constrain the camera. Constrain parent. And now when we play, we have matching animation data. The camera is no longer bound to the group, but all of that information that I animated works great. I'm going to do an increment and save. Control-Alt-S. It's asking if I want to overwrite this. I'm going to say yes. The reason I'm incrementing and saving is I can always have a version of my camera to go back to if I want to change this camera. Because that group structure allowed me to have the group constrained to the car, which allowed me to animate the camera separately. because this camera sat inside. By baking all of this down, I've now got all that camera animation onto the camera specifically. This is still a constraint on the camera, so I could bake it down further. Select the camera and say Key Bake Simulation. Then I can get rid of the parent constraint, and I'm ready to export. Additionally, whenever we go to export, we could say Bake Animation in that menu as well. Let's do it. File, Export Selection. We're no longer using the game exporter. We want to make sure to shift this to FBX Export. I'm going to leave the settings by default, but I will change, making sure that animation is checked on. Make sure bake animation is checked on if you did not bake the animation within the scene yourself. And finally, make sure cameras are checked on. This is my shot 2. I've already done this just to test, but I'm going to do it again. Camera shot 2, export selection, and say yes. Fantastic. Let's get into Unreal. Because now we have our sequence down here, and we have our scene playing. There's a couple of things I want to address. First off, make sure that we are set to the appropriate frame rate. I've shifted this to 24 frames per second. Secondly, I've changed the frame range to specifically cut on frame 2. Or shot 2, I'm so sorry, not frame 2, shot 2. After that finishes, we just loop. And to enable looping in the bottom left corner of the sequencer, we can click this loop playback range button. To create a camera, I need to select in the sequencer this create a new camera and set it as the current camera cut. I'm going to make sure I'm on frame 0 to do this. I now have a cinematic camera that I can set up and animate within my scene as I so choose. That being said, I just want to import the camera we just exported. I'm going to select the Cine Camera Actor. I'm going to right click. Nope, sorry. I selected the wrong one. Or did I? It's one of these two. I believe it's the actual actor. I was going to say camera component, but I believe it is the actor. Right click the actor, say import. And just simply select, navigate to where you exported that, and say open. I did change some settings from the defaults here. We do not need to make sure that matched by name only is checked on. If we do, we need to make sure the camera here is named the same as the camera in Maya. Currently that is not the case, so just uncheck that. Secondly, we already created the camera in Unreal by clicking the button, so we uncheck create cameras as well. Import. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to hit play. So my camera is all wrong because my timing is all wrong. You can see my sequence here. I just need to shift this back. And now we have our animation of our camera. Everything is very, very blurry though, which is going to be a lot of these settings here. We can adjust the camera settings, but by default it's going to import what Maya had for us. And I believe that's what we're running into with the focus of the camera. All we need to do is, under the camera component, hop down to the manual focus settings. And what I want to do is, let's see if I can reset these. I encourage you, play around with the settings so you get a good sense of how everything works. I click the reset setting in the details with no changes. So what I'm going to do is click and drag this number value of 5 and adjust it so that everything is back into focus. Notice that this number value changes drastically. My foreground's out of focus, but my background is very much in focus. Awesome. We can additionally adjust other things, such as the focal length. One thing I want to point out here real quick is, as I was working on this, I just adjusted the focus set distance at frame 0, but it has keyframe value. So as we move forward, it gets back to being out of focus. So I can further adjust that. I could add keys however much as I need to. There we go. There, notice some camera stutter here. In addition to poor rendering within the car, I likely will not keep this camera. I likely will do an exterior shot instead. Mount the camera to the car rather than from inside the car. That would allow me to keep all my animation, but avoid these rendering artifacts where these cars aren't necessarily meant to have interior views. Additionally, in my viewport, I'm being distracted by my grid and these dots in the middle of the screen. All these dots are the motion path of my camera and all of the keyframes on it. I can select this view and tap G to get rid of that information. And now we just have what my scene would look like. There's some other options we can enable. In our viewport, we can click perspective and enable cinematic view. If we do that, we need to make sure to go back to our camera actor. There we go. We get a lot of information down here now. This looks a little bit nicer to look through, almost like a play blast within Maya. There's a lot of jittery with the animation, and I have a feeling that's because of the baking animation options that we went through. We may take a look at that, how to fix those types of jitters moving forward, but I don't believe many people have such dynamic interior shots as I do with this shot. Now the process is just importing more animation shots, getting everything lined up, and importing more cameras.